The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Spokane, Washington Territory, 1885. Rose Owens clutched her carpetbag tighter as she stepped off the train, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The wedding dress carefully folded within that bag now seemed like a cruel joke, a reminder of promises broken and a future snatched away before it had even begun. Rose had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd corresponded with for almost a year. Frederick Holloway had seemed perfect in his letters, a successful merchant seeking a bride from back east, but that was before he'd learned of her past. The station master eyed her warily as she hesitated on the platform. "Miss, you planning on standing there all night? Station closes at sundown." "I'm sorry," Rose said, her voice barely audible above the hissing steam of the departing train. "Could you direct me to a respectable boarding house, one that might take in a woman traveling alone?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Peterson's place is 3 blocks north." "Tell her Sam sent you." He paused, studying her pale face. "Everything all right, miss? Someone's supposed to meet you." Rose forced a smile. "No, no one's meeting me. Thank you for your help." As she walked away, the weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders. Frederick's final letter had been clear: their engagement was off. He couldn't marry a woman with her history. A woman who had once worked in a saloon, even if only serving drinks. A woman whose reputation would tarnish his standing in the community. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard structure with lace curtains in the windows. A sign reading "Peterson's Boarding House Clean Rooms, Respectable Clientele" hung by the door. Rose took a deep breath and knocked. "Mrs. Peterson" was a stout woman with gray streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When Rose explained her situation, or rather, the sanitized version of it, the woman's lips tightened. "I don't usually take unmarried women without references, Mrs. Peterson said, "but you have an honest face and Sam's judgment is sound. 1 week's payment in advance and you'll share a room with Miss Collins, the school teacher." "Thank you," Rose said, relief washing over her. "I'll be no trouble." "See that you aren't," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Breakfast at 6, supper at 6. You're on your own for midday meal." Rose's room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a shared dresser. Her roommate, Eliza Collins, was out for the evening, attending a church social. Rose unpacked her few belongings, carefully hanging her dresses to remove the travel wrinkles. At the bottom of her trunk lay the wedding dress, ivory satin with pearl buttons down the back. She should sell it, she thought. Use the money to help establish herself here, since it was clear Frederick wanted nothing to do with her. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. By morning, she had resolved to find work and make a new life for herself in Spokane. If Frederick Holloway didn't want her, so be it. She was 22 years old, and she refused to be defeated by one man's rejection. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with the other boarders, 2 clerks from the mercantile and an elderly bookkeeper hurrying off to their jobs. Rose introduced herself to Eliza Collins, a pretty blonde woman about her own age who greeted her warmly. "Are you planning to stay in Spokane long?" Eliza asked, buttering a piece of toast. "I hope to," Rose replied. "I need to find work first." "What sort of work do you do?" Rose hesitated. In St. Louis, she'd worked as a saloon girl serving drinks, not selling herself, though many assumed otherwise. Before that, she'd been a maid in a fine house. Neither seemed likely to secure her respectable employment. "I can sew," she said finally, "and I'm good with numbers." Eliza brightened. "Mrs. Thornton at the dress shop might need help, and Mr. Wagner at the bank is looking for someone who can write a fair hand and keep ledgers." Armed with these suggestions, Rose ventured out into Spokane. The town was larger than she'd expected, with several streets of businesses, a courthouse, 3 churches, and a school. Wagons and riders moved through the dusty streets, and the sidewalks bustled with activity. Mrs. Thornton's dress shop was her first stop. The proprietress, a thin woman with nimble fingers, examined Rose's neat stitching on a handkerchief she'd embroidered. "Not bad," Mrs. Thornton said, "but I'm not hiring at present. Come back in the fall when we start on winter orders." At the bank, Mr. Wagner barely looked at her before shaking his head. "No women," he said firmly. "Too distracting for the male employees." By midday, Rose had tried the general store, the hotel, and even the newspaper office. No one was hiring, or at least, no one was hiring her. She was sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, contemplating her dwindling options when a shadow fell across her lap. "You look like you've lost your best friend," a deep voice observed. Rose looked up into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man in a dusty range coat, a Stetson pushed back on his head revealing dark blonde hair. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had been broken at some point, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, but there was something compelling about him. "I'm fine," she said, straightening her spine. "Just resting." "Yorke O'Malley," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'd offer to shake hands, but mine are a disgrace." He held up hands stained with what looked like ink. Despite herself, Rose smiled. "Rose Owens, new in town." When she nodded, he continued, "Looking for something or someone in particular?" "Work," she admitted. "I need employment." Yorke nodded thoughtfully. "My sister's looking for help at the newspaper. She's taken over as editor since our pa passed last winter." "I tried there already," Rose said. The young man at the counter said they weren't hiring. Yorke's expression darkened. "That would be Jenkins. He doesn't make hiring decisions." He extended a hand to help her up. "Come on, I'll introduce you to Hannah. She's the one who decides who works at the Spokane Star." Too desperate to refuse, Rose allowed him to escort her back to the newspaper office. Inside, a slender woman with the same blue eyes as Yorke was arguing with the young man behind the counter. "Jenkins, I don't care if you have to stay all night. Those subscription notices need to go out tomorrow." She looked up as they entered, her expression softening. "Yorke, I thought you were delivering those handbills to the outlying farms." "I am. Just stopped by to introduce you to someone." He nudged Rose forward. "This is Miss Rose Owens. She's looking for work, and Jenkins here apparently turned her away." Hannah's sharp gaze assessed Rose from head to toe. "Can you read, write, work a printing press?" "Yes to the first two," Rose said. "I've never seen a printing press up close, but you're willing to learn." When Rose nodded, Hannah smiled. "Good. Jenkins is leaving us at the end of the month, aren't you, Jenkins? And I need someone reliable. Hours are long, pay is modest, but it's honest work." "I'd be most grateful," Rose said, hardly daring to believe her luck. "Come back tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. We'll see how you do." Hannah turned to her brother. "Now get going with those handbills. The town meeting is in 2 days. Outside, Rose turned to Yorke. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I was beginning to think I'd have to leave town." "Hannah's fair," he said. "Work hard and she'll treat you right." He hesitated, then added, "I should warn you, though the Spokane Star takes some controversial positions, not everyone in town is fond of us." "What sort of positions?" "We support the railroad workers' right to fair wages. We think the Indian tribes got a raw deal with the treaties. We believe women should have the vote." He shrugged. "Nothing radical, but enough to ruffle feathers." "I'm not afraid of ruffled feathers," Rose said, thinking of all she'd already endured. Yorke grinned, transforming his face. "I had a feeling you weren't." He tipped his hat. "Till next time, Miss Owens." As he walked away, Rose felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The next day, Rose arrived at the newspaper office at 7:45, determined to make a good impression. Hannah was already there, sleeves rolled up, setting type for the day's edition. "Good, you're early," Hannah said without looking up. "There's an apron on that hook. Put it on and I'll show you the basics of typesetting." The work was exacting and required more physical strength than Rose had anticipated. By noon, her back ached and her fingers were stained black with ink, but she felt a sense of accomplishment as Hannah inspected her work. "Not bad for a first try," Hannah said. "You have a good eye for detail." They worked through the afternoon, printing the day's edition and preparing for the next day's paper. Jenkins sulked in the corner, clearly unhappy about his replacement being trained. As Rose was washing her hands at the end of the day, the front door of the office opened, and Frederick Holloway walked in. Rose froze, water dripping from her fingertips. Frederick was exactly as his photograph had shown: tall, slim, with fashionable side whiskers and an expensive suit. His eyes widened in shock when he saw her. "Rose, what are you doing here?" Hannah looked between them. "You know each other." Frederick's face hardened. "We corresponded briefly. Miss Owens failed to mention certain aspects of her past that made her unsuitable as a wife." He turned to Hannah. "I'm not sure you want someone of her background working for your newspaper." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her past would follow her, poisoning any chance of a fresh start. Hannah's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Holloway, I decide who works for the Spokane Star. Now, did you come here for a reason, or just to harass my employee?" Frederick stiffened. "I came to place an advertisement for my store's spring sale. Jenkins will help you with that," Hannah said coldly. "Rose, come with me." "I need your help in the back." In the back room, Hannah handed Rose a cup of strong coffee. "Drink this, then tell me what that was about." Rose's hands trembled as she took the cup. "I came to Spokane to marry Frederick. We'd been corresponding for a year. But then he learned that I once worked in a saloon in St. Louis." "As what?" Hannah asked bluntly. "A serving girl," Rose said, lifting her chin. "Just serving drinks, but in St. Louis that was enough to ruin a woman's reputation." Hannah nodded slowly. "And Holloway called off the engagement when he found out." "Yes, he wrote that he couldn't marry a woman with my background, that the townspeople would never accept me." Rose blinked back tears. "I decided to come anyway. I'd sold everything back home and spent nearly all my savings on the train ticket." "Well, Holloway's a fool," Hannah said decisively. "And as for the townspeople, they'll form their own opinions, given time." She squeezed Rose's shoulder. "Your past is your own business, Rose. As long as you do good work here, that's all that matters to me." "Thank you," Rose whispered. As she walked back to the boarding house that evening, Rose felt both relieved and anxious. Hannah's acceptance was encouraging, but Frederick's reaction confirmed her fears. How long before everyone in town knew of her past? How long before the whispers started, the doors closed in her face? She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with Yorke as he came out of the livery stable. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with hands on her shoulders. "You look like you're 1,000 miles away." Rose managed a smile. "Just thinking. Hannah work you too hard on your first day?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes were concerned. "No, the work was fine. I enjoyed it." She hesitated, then added, "I had an unexpected encounter with someone from my past." Yorke's expression sharpened. "Anyone I need to have a word with?" The protective note in his voice surprised her. "No, nothing like that. Just complicated," he nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, if you need a friendly ear, I'm usually around, or Hannah's good at keeping confidences." "Thank you." She looked at him curiously. "Do you work at the newspaper too?" "Sometimes. Mostly I run a small freight business, deliveries to the outlying farms and ranches, occasional trips to Seattle or Portland for special items." He grinned. "Hannah puts me to work whenever she's shorthanded, though." They fell into step together, walking toward the center of town. "How do you like Spokane so far?" Yorke asked. "It seems like a nice town," Rose replied, "though I haven't seen much of it yet." "We're having the Founders' Day picnic this Sunday," he said. "Good way to meet people, food, music, the usual festivities." "That sounds nice," Rose said, though the thought of facing the townspeople potentially with Frederick's rumors already circulating made her stomach clench. "Maybe I'll see you there," Yorke said as they reached the corner where their paths diverged. "Good night, Miss Owens." "Good night, Mr. O'Malley." The rest of the week passed in a blur of learning typesetting, taking subscription payments, and helping Hannah with the myriad tasks involved in publishing a newspaper. By Friday, Rose's fingers were permanently stained with ink, but she felt a sense of accomplishment with each edition they produced. Hannah proved to be a demanding but fair employer. She expected excellence, but was patient in teaching Rose the intricacies of newspaper work. They often worked late into the evening, especially when important news broke like the railroad strike that was brewing in Seattle. "This could spread east," Hannah said as they prepared Saturday's edition. "The workers are asking for safer conditions and reasonable hours. The company is refusing to negotiate." "Do you think there will be violence?" Rose asked, remembering the railroad riots she'd seen in St. Louis. I hope not, but history isn't encouraging, Hannah sighed. People with power rarely give it up willingly. On Sunday morning, Rose debated whether to attend the Founders' Day picnic. Part of her wanted to hide in her room, avoiding potential confrontation. But another part, a stronger part, refused to be cowed. She'd done nothing wrong, and she wouldn't act as if she had. She dressed in her second-best dress, a blue calico with white trim, and pinned her dark hair up in a simple but neat style. Eliza Collins, who had become increasingly friendly, insisted they walk to the park together. "You'll love the picnic," Eliza said as they strolled down the street. "Mrs. Miller's apple pie alone is worth the trip." The park was already crowded when they arrived. Blankets and tables dotted the grassy area, loaded with food. Children ran and played while adults chatted in groups. A small band was setting up on a platform at one end of the park. Rose felt eyes turn toward her as she and Eliza walked through the crowd. Some glances were merely curious. A newcomer was always of interest in a small town, but others held a more calculating assessment. Had Frederick already spread his poison? Eliza, Rose. Hannah's voice called from a nearby blanket. "Come join us." Hannah sat with an older woman who had the same blue eyes as Hannah and Yorke, though her hair was silver rather than blonde. "Rose, this is our mother, Margaret O'Malley," Hannah said. "Ma, this is Rose Owens, my new assistant at the paper." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. O'Malley," Rose said, offering her hand. Margaret O'Malley's grip was firm, her gaze direct. "Likewise, Hannah tells me you're a quick study with the printing press." "I'm trying to be," Rose said modestly. "Sit, both of you," Hannah insisted. Ma brought enough food to feed an army. They were halfway through the meal when Yorke appeared, his hat in hand and his hair wind-blown. "Sorry I'm late. Had a wagon wheel break on the way back from the Peterson place." He settled beside Rose, his presence both comforting and unsettling. She was becoming increasingly aware of him, the breadth of his shoulders, the timbre of his voice, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "You came," he said quietly, just for her ears. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," she admitted. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Frederick Holloway, accompanied by a slender blonde woman on his arm. Rose tensed as they approached the blanket. "Mrs. O'Malley, Miss O'Malley," Frederick nodded formally. "May I introduce Miss Caroline Bennett?" "She's visiting from Seattle." The O'Malleys returned the greeting politely. Frederick's gaze slid over Rose as if she were invisible, but Miss Bennett studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Owens," Miss Bennett said, "I understand you're new to Spokane as well." "Yes," Rose replied, wondering how much Frederick had told her. "How nice to have another newcomer," Miss Bennett said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps we could take tea sometime." Before Rose could respond, a commotion erupted near the bandstand. A group of men had surrounded another man, their voices raised in anger. Yorke was on his feet instantly. "Trouble," he muttered, moving toward the confrontation. Hannah followed, with Rose close behind. They arrived to find three men confronting a fourth, a man in work clothes with a smear of coal dust on his cheek. "We don't want union agitators in Spokane," one of the men was saying, poking the worker in the chest. "Take your rabble rousing back to Seattle." "I have as much right to be here as anyone," the worker replied, standing his ground though he was outnumbered. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" Yorke's voice cut through the tension. The man doing the poking turned. "Stay out of this, O'Malley, just removing an unwelcome guest." "In a public park at a public event," Hannah interjected. "I wasn't aware you'd been appointed town marshal, Mr. Sanders." Sanders, a florid man in an expensive suit, glared at her. "This doesn't concern you or your newspaper, Miss O'Malley." "Actually, it does," Hannah said coolly. "Intimidation of railroad workers would make an interesting front-page story." The standoff might have escalated further if the mayor hadn't arrived, his face creased with concern. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Just a difference of opinion, Mayor," Sanders said smoothly. "Nothing to concern yourself with." The worker, seeing his opportunity, slipped away through the crowd. Sanders and his companions moved off, muttering among themselves. "That was brave," Rose said to Hannah as they walked back to their blanket. "Or foolish," Hannah replied with a wry smile. Sanders owns half the businesses in town. He can make things difficult for the Star if he chooses. Is that why you stood up to him? For a story, Hannah shook her head. For the principle, every man has a right to fair treatment, whether he's a banker or a railroad worker. She glanced at Rose. Just as every woman deserves to be judged on who she is now, not who she was in the past. Rose felt her cheeks warm. You're very kind. Not kind, Hannah corrected. Just fair. The rest of the picnic passed without incident, though Rose was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed her. By the time she and Eliza walked back to the boarding house, her initial confidence had worn thin. People were talking about you, Eliza said as they prepared for bed. About why Frederick broke the engagement. Rose stiffened. Did he tell everyone then? He told the Bennetts, and Mrs. Bennett told my mother, and… Eliza shrugged apologetically. You know how small towns are. Yes, Rose said quietly, I do. Sleep eluded her that night. By morning, she had resolved to speak to Hannah about the situation. If her presence at the newspaper would cause problems, perhaps it would be better to move on. But when she arrived at the office, she found Hannah and Yorke in heated discussion with a man she recognized as the railroad worker from the picnic. The company is bringing in strikebreakers, the man was saying. They're planning to evict the striking workers from company housing. When? Hannah asked, already taking notes. End of the week. They're bringing men in from as far as Chicago. And the union's response, Yorke asked, will stand our ground, but it could get ugly. The man rubbed his face wearily. We're not asking for the moon, just safe conditions and reasonable hours. After the man left, Hannah turned to Rose. I need to go to Seattle. Someone has to report on this from the workers' side, not just the company line. I'll drive you, Yorke offered. It's not safe for you to go alone. Who will run the paper? Rose asked. You will, Hannah said, as if it were obvious. Jenkins can help with the press, but you'll need to handle the rest. Rose blinked in surprise. Me, but I've only been here a week. And you've learned faster than anyone I've ever taught, Hannah said firmly. You can do this, Rose. The vote of confidence was overwhelming. I'll do my best, Rose promised. After Hannah and Yorke departed for Seattle later that day, Rose found herself effectively in charge of the Spokane Star. The responsibility was terrifying but also exhilarating. She worked from dawn until well past dusk, writing articles, setting type, and managing the press runs with Jenkins's reluctant assistance. The first test of her resolve came 2 days later when Sanders entered the office, his face thunderous. Where's Miss O'Malley? He demanded. She's away on business, Rose replied, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Can I help you with something? Sanders slammed a copy of that day's paper onto the counter. This editorial supporting the railroad strikers, is this the official position of the Spokane Star? The editorial in question had been written by Hannah before she left, arguing that the railroad company's practices were not only unfair to workers but harmful to the communities they served. The Star reports the truth as we see it, Rose said, echoing Hannah's frequent statement. If you'd like to submit a letter expressing an alternative viewpoint, we'd be happy to consider it for publication. Sanders's face darkened. You'd be wise to reconsider your position, Miss Owens. A woman with your background shouldn't be throwing stones. The threat was unmistakable. Are you saying my past makes my work here less valid? Rose asked quietly. I'm saying you're in no position to take the moral high ground, Sanders sneered. Not everyone in town is as forgiving as the O'Malleys. After he left, Rose sat at her desk, hands trembling slightly. She'd known this would happen eventually, that her past would be used against her, but knowing didn't make the reality any easier to face. The next day, she noticed that several regular advertisers had withdrawn their business. The day after that, Mrs. Peterson informed her that due to changing circumstances, Rose would need to find new lodgings by the end of the month. It's nothing personal, the landlady insisted, not meeting Rose's eyes, just business considerations. By the time Hannah and Yorke returned from Seattle 5 days later, the situation had deteriorated further. Anonymous notes had been left at the newspaper office suggesting that fallen women weren't welcome in Spokane. The general store refused to sell supplies to Rose, and the restaurant owner turned her away at the door. "It's worse than I expected," Hannah said grimly after Rose recounted the events of the past week. "Sanders is using his influence to turn the town against you." "Against the Star," Rose corrected. "I'm just the convenient target." "Both," Hannah said, shuffling through the pile of withdrawn advertisements. "This will hurt the paper financially." "I should leave," Rose said, voicing the thought that had been growing in her mind. "Find another town, start fresh where no one knows about my past. And let them win." Yorke's voice was incredulous. "You haven't done anything wrong, Rose, haven't I?" she asked bitterly. "I worked in a saloon." "I came here to marry a man under false pretenses. You served drinks to make a living," Hannah interrupted. "And Frederick knew exactly who you were. He just didn't have the courage to stand by you when faced with social pressure." Rose shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." "I can't stay where I'm not welcome." "You're welcome here," Yorke said, his blue eyes intense. "At the Star, with us." The conviction in his voice nearly broke her resolve, but she couldn't bear to be the cause of the newspaper's downfall, not when the O'Malleys had shown her nothing but kindness. "I appreciate that," she said softly, "but I think it's best if I move on." That night, as Rose packed her belongings in the boarding house room, Eliza watched with distress. "It's not right," the school teacher said. "You've done nothing to deserve this treatment." Rose folded her blue calico dress carefully. "People fear what they don't understand, and they judge what they fear." "Where will you go?" Eliza asked. "I'm not sure yet. Portland maybe, or San Francisco." Rose hesitated, then added, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone until I'm gone." "I'd rather avoid any unpleasantness," Eliza nodded sadly. "I'll miss you." In the morning, Rose slipped out of the boarding house before dawn. She decided to take the early stage to Walla Walla, then connect to Portland from there. With her carpet bag in one hand and a small trunk to be loaded on the stage, she made her way to the stage office. The street was mostly deserted at that hour, with only a few early risers about their business. Rose kept her head down, hoping to avoid notice. She was nearly to the stage office when a voice called her name. "Rose, wait." She turned to see Yorke running toward her, his hat askew and his coat unbuttoned. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye?" he asked when he reached her, slightly out of breath. "I thought it would be easier," she admitted. "Easier for whom?" He took the carpet bag from her hand. "Come with me. The stage leaves in 30 minutes, she protested. "Then we have 30 minutes to talk," he said firmly. "Please, Rose." Unable to resist the pleading in his eyes, she allowed him to lead her to the newspaper office. Inside, Hannah was waiting, along with several people. Rose recognized Eliza Collins, the mayor, Reverend Thompson from the Methodist Church, and surprisingly, Mrs. Peterson. "What is this?" Rose asked, confusion and wariness mingling in her voice. "An intervention," Hannah said with a slight smile. "We won't let you be driven away by ignorance and prejudice." "We've been talking to people," Yorke explained, "telling them the truth about Sanders's campaign against you. About how he's using your past to punish the Star for supporting the railroad workers. And people are listening," Eliza added. "Not everyone, but enough." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "I owe you an apology, Miss Owens. I allowed Mr. Sanders to influence me with his talk of propriety when I should have judged you on your conduct in my house, which has been nothing but respectable." "We all have pasts," Reverend Thompson said gently, "some more difficult than others. But it's what we do with our present that defines us." Rose looked around the room, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Yorke urged. "Say you'll give Spokane another chance." The hope in his eyes was almost her undoing. "I don't want to cause problems for the Star or for your family." "The Star has weathered worse storms," Hannah said dismissively. "And as for our family," she exchanged a glance with Yorke, "we're sturdier than we look." Rose hesitated, torn between the desire to flee and the longing to belong. "What about Frederick and Sanders?" "Frederick is engaged to Miss Bennet now," Eliza supplied. "He's unlikely to cause more trouble." "And Sanders is finding that not everyone in town shares his views," the mayor added. "Particularly after word got out that he's using the railroad issue as a personal vendetta." Please stay, Rose, Yorke said softly. Your past doesn't define your future. You get to write the next chapter yourself. In that moment, looking into his earnest face, Rose made her decision. All right, she whispered, I'll stay. The relief in the room was palpable. As the others dispersed, Yorke lingered, still holding her carpetbag. Thank you, he said. For what? For trusting us, for being brave enough to stay. Rose looked at him curiously. Why do you care so much? Yorke set the carpetbag down, his expression serious. Because I know what it's like to be judged for your past, to have people look at you and see only your mistakes. He took a deep breath. I did time in territorial prison when I was younger, bar fight gone wrong. Most people around here have forgotten or chosen to overlook it, but I haven't. The revelation stunned her. I had no idea. It's not something I advertise, he said with a wry smile, but it taught me that we're more than our worst moments. And you, Rose Owens, are much more than whatever happened in St. Louis. His words touched something deep inside her, a wounded place that had begun to heal in the warmth of his regard. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly, for trusting me with that. It seems only fair, he replied, since you've trusted us with your future. Over the next few weeks, Rose settled into a new rhythm in Spokane. The hostile whispers gradually subsided, though she knew there were still those who disapproved of her presence. She threw herself into her work at the newspaper, learning everything Hannah could teach her about journalism, printing, and running a business. Frederick and Caroline Bennett were married in a lavish ceremony that Rose pointedly did not attend. Sanders continued his campaign against the Star, but with diminishing effect as more people recognized his motivations, and Yorke became a constant in her life. He stopped by the newspaper office almost daily, sometimes bringing coffee or pastries, other times just to chat. They began taking Sunday afternoon walks together, exploring Spokane and the surrounding countryside. You're looking happier, Hannah observed one day as they worked side by side at the printing press. Spokane seems to agree with you now. Parts of it certainly do, Rose replied, thinking of Yorke's smile. Hannah grinned knowingly. My brother's quite taken with you, you know. Rose felt her cheeks warm. We're friends, Hannah repeated skeptically. Is that why he polished his boots for an hour before taking you to the Independence Day celebration? July had brought not only national celebrations, but also a resolution to the railroad strike. The workers had won some concessions, improved safety measures, and slightly better wages, though not all they'd hoped for. The Star's coverage of the dispute had been balanced but sympathetic to the workers, earning them respect even from those who disagreed with their position. Rose's life had settled into a comfortable pattern. She rented a small room above the millinery shop, private but affordable. She had friends now, Eliza, Hannah, some of the other shopkeepers and townspeople who had come to know her through her work at the paper. And she had Yorke, whose place in her life had grown increasingly important. On a warm evening in late July, they were walking by the river when Yorke suddenly stopped, turning to face her. Rose, there's something I need to say. Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. What is it? I'm leaving Spokane for a while. The words were like a bucket of cold water. Leaving? Why? I've been offered a contract to deliver supplies to the mining camps in Montana Territory. It's good money enough that I could expand my freight business when I return. How long will you be gone? She asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. 6 weeks, maybe 8. He took her hand. I wanted to ask, will you write to me while I'm gone? Of course, she said, squeezing his fingers. I work for a newspaper, after all. I can send you all the Spokane news. That's not, he broke off, frustrated. I don't just want Spokane news, Rose. I want to hear from you, about your day, your thoughts. I want to know if you'll miss me half as much as I'll miss you. The naked emotion in his voice took her breath away. Yorke. I'm falling in love with you, Rose Owens, he said simply. Have been since the day I saw you sitting on that bench looking like the weight of the world was on your shoulders. Rose stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You can't mean that. Why not? Because of who I am, what I've done. I know exactly who you are, Yorke said firmly. You're the woman who faced down this town's prejudice with courage and grace. You're the assistant editor who works until midnight to get the paper out on time. You're the friend who brings soup to Eliza when she's sick and reads to Mrs. Thompson when her eyes are too tired." He stepped closer. "And yes, you're also the woman who once worked in a saloon to survive. All of those things make you who you are, and I love all of you, Rose." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I don't deserve you." "Now that," Yorke said with a gentle smile, "is the only foolish thing I've ever heard you say." He touched her cheek. "We deserve each other. The question is, do you feel anything for me?" "Yes," she whispered. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you walked me back to the newspaper that first day." His smile was radiant. "Then write to me while I'm gone, and when I come back, perhaps we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." "More permanent," she echoed. "I'm not Frederick Holloway," Yorke said, a hint of steel in his voice. "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. When I come back, if you still feel the same way, I'd like to court you properly with marriage as the goal." Rose's heart soared. "I'd like that very much." He kissed her then, a gentle brush of lips that held the promise of deeper passion. When they parted, they were both smiling, a little shy but full of hope. "6 weeks," he said. "I'll be back before the first autumn leaves fall." Yorke left 2 days later, driving a heavily loaded wagon toward the Montana Territory. Rose watched him go with a mixture of sadness and anticipation, already composing her first letter in her head. Life in Spokane continued. The newspaper thrived under Hannah's direction, with Rose taking on increasing responsibility. She discovered a talent for writing human interest stories that connected with readers on an emotional level. She wrote to Yorke every few days, long letters full of town news but also her personal thoughts and feelings. His replies came less frequently due to the remote nature of the mining camps, but each one was a treasure she read and reread until the paper was soft at the creases. August passed and September began. The promised 6 weeks stretched to 7, then 8. Rose tried not to worry, knowing that travel in the territories could be unpredictable due to weather and road conditions. In the 3rd week of September, a stranger arrived at the newspaper office. He was trail-worn and dusty, his expression grave. "I'm looking for Miss Rose Owens," he said. Rose stepped forward from the typesetting table. "I'm Rose Owens." The man removed his hat. "Name's Carter. I was working the supply route with Yorke O'Malley." He hesitated, and Rose felt her heart constrict. "There was an accident, miss. Wagon broke an axle on a steep grade. Yorke was hurt pretty bad." The room seemed to spin. "Is he?" She couldn't say the word. "He's alive," Carter said quickly, "but laid up in Missoula. Doctor says he shouldn't be moved yet, but he insisted I bring you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper with trembling fingers. Rose opened it to find Yorke's familiar handwriting, shakier than usual. "Rose, I'm sorry to break my promise about returning in 6 weeks. Doctor says I'll mend, but it will take time. I understand if you can't wait. Know that I love you regardless." Yorke Rose looked up at Carter. "How bad is it?" "Broken leg, busted ribs, some internal bruising. Doctor's most worried about infection setting in." Carter twisted his hat in his hands. "He's a tough one, though. Wouldn't even take laudanum for the pain until I promised to bring you that note." Hannah had joined them, her face pale with concern. "When did this happen?" "About 5 days ago." Rose made her decision instantly. "I'm going to Missoula." "Rose," Hannah began. "I have to go, Hannah. He needs me." She turned to Carter. "How long to get there?" 4 days by stage if the weather holds. "I'll leave tomorrow." Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course you will. I'll help you prepare." The journey to Missoula was long and arduous. The stagecoach bumped and jolted over rough roads, making sleep nearly impossible. Rose barely noticed the discomfort, her mind consumed with worry for Yorke. What if infection had set in? What if he was worse by the time she arrived? Missoula was smaller than Spokane, a frontier town dominated by the lumber industry and serving as a supply point for nearby mining operations. The doctor's office was easy to find, a white clapboard building on the main street with a sign reading Dr. William Allen, physician and surgeon. Rose's heart pounded as she knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes answered. "I'm looking for Yorke O'Malley," Rose said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm Rose Owens. The woman's face brightened. Oh, Miss Owens, he'll be so pleased you've come. I'm Martha Allen, the doctor's wife. We've been caring for Mr. O'Malley since they brought him in. She led Rose through the house to a back room that had been converted into a sick room. And there was Yorke, propped up on pillows, his face pale and drawn with pain. His right leg was splinted and bandages were visible beneath his partially unbuttoned shirt. His eyes widened when he saw her. Rose, am I dreaming? Not unless we're sharing the same dream, she said, moving to his bedside. You didn't really think I'd let a little thing like a broken leg change my mind, did you? He reached for her hand, his grip weaker than she remembered but still warm. You didn't have to come all this way. Yes, I did. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed. You promised to come back to me, and if you couldn't come to me, then I had to come to you. A ghost of his familiar grin appeared. Stubborn woman. You knew that when you fell in love with me, she reminded him. Mrs. Allen discreetly left the room, closing the door behind her. How bad is it really? Rose asked, studying his face. Bad enough, Yorke admitted. Legs broken in 2 places, ribs are cracked. Doc was worried about internal bleeding, but that seems to have stopped. He squeezed her hand. I'll heal, Rose, it just takes time. Then time is what we'll take, she said firmly. I've spoken with Hannah. The star can manage without me for a while. You're staying, hope bloomed in his eyes, until you're well enough to travel back to Spokane. She stroked his cheek, feeling the stubble beneath her fingers. We'll go home together. Over the next 2 weeks, Rose divided her time between caring for Yorke and helping Mrs. Allen with household tasks to earn her keep. Dr. Allen, a gruff but competent physician, declared that Yorke was healing well, with no sign of the dreaded infection. You're a lucky man, O'Malley, the doctor said during one examination. That fall could have killed you. I know, Yorke replied, his eyes on Rose. I've got a lot to live for. As his strength returned, Yorke began to fret about the time Rose was spending away from her work. The star needs you, he argued. Hannah needs you. Hannah has Jenkins and 2 new apprentices, Rose countered, and the star will be there when we get back. And your position is secure, she smiled. Hannah says if I don't come back, she'll come get me herself. By mid-October, doctor. Allen declared Yorke fit enough to travel, though he would need to use crutches for at least another month. The leg's healing clean, he said. Keep weight off it for now, and you should recover full use in time. The return journey to Spokane was necessarily slower than Rose's frantic trip to Missoula. They traveled by private wagon rather than stagecoach, stopping frequently to allow Yorke to rest. The autumn landscape was ablaze with color gold and crimson leaves against the deep green of the pines. It's beautiful country, Rose observed as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a river valley. Not as beautiful as what I'm looking at right now, Yorke said, his gaze fixed on her face. She blushed, still not entirely accustomed to his open admiration. Flatterer. Truth-teller, he corrected. Rose, there's something I need to ask you. What's that? He shifted on the wagon seat, wincing slightly as he jostled his leg. I had plans for how to do this properly, flowers, a nice dinner, maybe a ring. But these past weeks have shown me that life's too unpredictable to wait for perfect moments. He took her hand. I love you, Rose Owens. Will you marry me? Though she had anticipated this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. His kiss was tender but thorough, a promise of the life they would build together. They arrived in Spokane on a crisp October morning. News of their return and engagement spread quickly through town. Hannah was delighted, embracing Rose and gently hugging her brother. It's about time, she declared. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you 2 in the newspaper office until you came to your senses. Margaret O'Malley was more restrained but equally pleased. You'll be good for each other, she told Rose privately. Yorke needs someone with your strength and principles. Not everyone in town shared in their happiness. Frederick and Caroline Holloway pointedly crossed the street to avoid them when they walked downtown. Sanders still refused to advertise in the Star, but these were minor shadows on their joy. They were married in November, a simple ceremony in the Methodist Church with Reverend Thompson officiating. Hannah stood up for Rose, while Yorke's friend from the freight company served as his best man. Rose wore a gown of deep blue velvet rather than traditional white, a choice that raised some eyebrows but felt right to her. This was a new beginning, not a pretense that her past didn't exist. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Yorke said when he saw her walking down the aisle. "Even without a white dress," she whispered as she reached him. "Especially without a white dress," he replied. "You're perfect exactly as you are, Rose Owens." "Rose O'Malley soon," she reminded him with a smile. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Rose felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged with this man, in this town that had challenged her but ultimately accepted her. They moved into a small house near the newspaper office, close enough that Rose could continue her work while Yorke rebuilt his freight business. His leg healed steadily, though he occasionally used a cane on cold days. Their first Christmas as a married couple was a joyful affair, celebrated with Hannah and Margaret in the O'Malley family home. As they sat before the fire after dinner, Yorke's arm around Rose's shoulders, she reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. "Penny for your thoughts," Yorke murmured in her ear. "I was just thinking about the day I arrived in Spokane," she said. "How close I came to getting right back on that train. I'm glad you didn't. So am I." She turned to face him. "I have something to tell you." His expression grew concerned. "Everything all right, more than all right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Yorke's face transformed with wonder. "A baby, are you sure?" Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday, due in early summer. His arms enfolded her gently, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he repeated, awe in his voice. "Our baby." The news delighted the family. Hannah immediately began planning how to rearrange the newspaper schedule to accommodate Rose's impending motherhood, while Margaret started knitting tiny garments. The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Rose continued working at the newspaper, though she reduced her hours as her pregnancy progressed. Yorke's freight business prospered, allowing them to add a nursery to their small home. In June of 1887, Rose gave birth to a healthy son they named James Thomas O'Malley. Yorke paced the hallway throughout her labor, alternately praying and making bargains with God. When the doctor finally allowed him into the bedroom, he approached the bed with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect," Rose said tiredly, cradling the small bundle. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and your blue eyes. And your strength," Yorke added, sitting carefully beside them. "You were amazing, Rose." She smiled, exhausted but content. "We did it together, just like everything else." Young James thrived under his parents' devoted care. Rose returned to the newspaper part-time when he was 3 months old, often bringing him with her. Hannah proved to be an adoring aunt, happy to mind the baby while Rose worked on articles or typesetting. Frederick and Caroline Holloway left Spokane that winter, moving to Seattle, where Frederick had accepted a position with a larger mercantile company. Their departure removed one source of tension from Rose's life, though she had long since stopped caring about Frederick's opinion of her. By James's first birthday, Rose was pregnant again, this time with twins, to everyone's surprise. Yorke alternated between elation and terror at the prospect of 3 children under the age of 2. "We'll manage," Rose assured him. "We always do." The twins, Elizabeth Margaret and Sarah Hannah, were born in February 1889. The house suddenly seemed much smaller with 3 young children, but it was filled with love and laughter. On a snowy evening just before Christmas that year, Rose sat by the fire nursing Sarah while Yorke read a story to James and Elizabeth. The scene was so perfect it made her heart ache with joy. "And they lived happily ever after," Yorke finished, closing the book. James clapped his pudgy hands, demanding again. "Tomorrow, little man," Yorke promised, lifting the sleepy toddler. "Time for bed now." After the children were tucked in, Yorke and Rose sat together before the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I got a letter from Hannah today," Rose said. "The Star won an award from the Territorial Press Association for that series on Indian rights." Well deserved, Yorke said proudly. Your writing made people see the humanity in the stories, not just the politics. It's easier to hate or fear what you don't know, Rose mused. That's what happened when I first came to Spokane. People judged me without knowing me, and now, she smiled. Now I'm Mrs. Yorke O'Malley, mother of 3, assistant editor of the Spokane Star and treasurer of the Ladies' Aid Society. She laughed softly. Quite respectable. You were always respectable, Yorke said firmly. It just took some people longer to see it, including me, she admitted. I believed what Frederick and others said about me, that my past made me unworthy. She turned to face him. You were the first person to tell me that my past didn't define my future. I just spoke the truth, Yorke said, stroking her cheek. You're the one who proved it every day since. We proved it together, Rose corrected, echoing her words from James's birth. Everything we've built, our family, our work, our place in this community, we've done it together. And we'll keep doing it together, Yorke promised, for the rest of our lives. As they sealed the promise with a kiss, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a desperate young woman rejected for her past to a beloved wife and mother with a future bright with possibilities. The path hadn't been smooth, but every step had led her home to Yorke, to their children, to the life they were building day by day. Outside, snow fell gently on Spokane, covering the town in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, Rose O'Malley held her husband close and gave thanks for second chances, for courage, and for the love that had shown her that while the past may shape us, it is our choices today that truly define who we become.